All right. Welcome to another edition of Shabbat Lounge. This is Matt.
And Jake here.
We're coming to you with another edition of Talking Torah. And this is week 28, and it's what?
Metzora.
Or otherwise known as the Leper.
Leper. This is the Leper portion here.
The Leper edition. Leper print.
Yes.
Cheetah print. No.
Sure.
So we appreciate you stopping by and appreciate you sharing this content, liking this content, telling others about this content. Leave us a comment
About this content.
And our main objective here is we want you to read these Torah portions and join people from all over the world reading the same piece of scriptures together, which is powerful.
Right.
We're all doing this at the same time.
Right. And this is going to be Leviticus 14 through 15. And the point of this is just high-level view, our little snippets of what you're going to find in this section.
That's right. And we don't claim to have a corner on the truth and know all the answers, but we're just hoping you can join us in our quest for the truth. All right, so as we get into this, one of the first things we see here is this the bird sacrifice. So as we're going to see in just a second, there's two birds mentioned. What kind of birds were they, Jake?
Pigeons?
Or doves.
Or turtle doves, right.
And so in Leviticus 12, it talked about if you're too poor, you can do what?
You bring doves or pigeons instead of a lamb.
Yeah.
So the whole point of that, right, is because Leviticus 12 is not part of this portion, but we're just bringing that up to show that there's this connection to poverty with the birds. And then we had mentioned something similar about when Abraham first makes the covenant with Yah, and he has all the animals, and it's like every animal that would be offered is in that, including birds, and it's almost like this is a covenant made for all people, because it's all, statuses are able to come to Yah.
Yeah, that's good. So then, if you'll read this kind of goes into more details about what's going to happen here.
Right. So the priest will order someone to get 2 living, clean birds, some cedar wood, red yarn, and a hyssop sprig to use for the cleansing.
So this was what was required for the cleansing. So cedar, is a carvable wood. You ever make something out of cedar, Jake?
Yes. And it's, pretty easy to work with.
Yeah, I love working with cedar. The when you cut into it with your saw, it cuts like butter.
Right.
So, and, especially if you've ever cut, if you're like me and you save lumber and then try to cut into it years after it's been sitting in a pile, it's a different experience. Yeah. It just doesn't cut that great.
Right.
So
always leaves the blades on my saw very greasy, since it's like cutting butter.
Yes, that's right. Very slippery. So, and then there's this scarlet, this red thread that he mentions, and it made me think of this scripture. Will you read this?
Okay, come on now, let's discuss this, says Yahweh. Though your sins are bright red, they will become as white as snow. Though they are dark red, they will become as white as wool.
And that comes from Isaiah 1:18. So the other thing that's mentioned is hyssop. This is when I went to the place where I find images, this is what pulled up in there is a hyssop plant. So I don't know. It kind of reminds me of... Actually, what's interesting, the flowers on this look just like the chaste tree or a vitex, but it reminds me of like a salvia or something kind of like that. But
no one knows what that is, Matt.
Yes,
use something people know.
Yes,
lavender. It looks like lavender,
kind of like lavender. So it is mentioned 5 times in the Bible. So Jake, tell us, where do you see it in the Bible?
Where do I see it? Well, usually I see it as a paintbrush, as is our first example here.
The first paintbrush, right?
So the painting with the hyssop sprig of the blood around the door at Passover. They use it to flick the blood with the consecration of the tabernacle. Here, when they're doing the leprosy cleansing, David says he longed to be cleansed with hyssop, and then offered to Messiah on the cross. So this was the vinegar sponge was on a
hyssop stalk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which makes me think the cross wasn't as far off the ground as some people think it was, or this is a different plant.
Well, maybe it grows up a little bigger.
Maybe it's taller than what you see in this picture. So, but
yeah,
interesting. So
it must have been maybe a tiny sponge.
Maybe. I don't know. But hyssop is mentioned, always associated with cleansing, and then they had to put blood on these certain portions, and so we see this in other places. Is this similar to what the priests do? There's something a couple of times in the Bible in the Torah where it talks about putting the blood specifically on your thumb and your ear, your toe, kind of thing.
Right. And the right one.
Yes,
not the wrong one,
not the left one.
Oh,
and I believe it's implied often by most people who understand Hebrew that it goes to what you hear, what you do, and where you go.
Right, and you'll hear a lot about that when they talk about a mark on the forehead or a mark on your hand. It's what you think and do, kind of same kind of concept.
So, Jake, what do you think about this concept that it wasn't the ritual that healed you?
Right, and it even says as much, but I think a lot of times we skip over that, especially coming out of church teaching. It's they did those things in order to save themselves, or that was in order to make them a certain way. No, this is what you did, right, in response to the being healed.
Is when you go back and look at the text. And so once again, we're saying, don't take our word for it. Go read Leviticus 14 and 15, and you'll see that he says in there, basically, do this cleansing ritual. And if you're, if you're healed.
Yes. Once you're outside the camp, because you're a leper.
You're unclean.
Right. And now you've been checked and determined to have been cleansed of the leprosy. Then you go through this process. But the healing comes prior to all the quote-unquote ritual.
And the rituals are a response to the healing.
Right.
So kind of like what, a lot of people describe baptism that way. It's a response. Yeah. So it also made us think of Luke 17:14.
Right. When he saw them, this is the 10 lepers coming towards him and asking him to be cleansed. When he saw them, he told them, "Show yourselves to the priests." As they went, they were made clean. When one of them saw that he was healed, he turned back and praised Elohim in a loud voice. So here again, he's showing they're clean, but they have to show the priest that they're clean. They're not going to the priest to become cleansed.
Yeah, and he heals them on the way, like remotely. He didn't touch them. He just and he's telling them in the foreknowledge and that this is going to happen,
right?
And they believed him,
right?
And they took off.
I think that's probably the most important part is they believed him, because a lot of times in most of the miracles of healing, he'll say to them, "Your faith has healed you." Yes, and it's the fact that they are taking his word for it and going to the priest to be, go through the process. They have the faith that what he said is true. Yeah, and so that's where the cleansing comes from.
So that's Luke 17:14, and then these different offerings. So this was kind of the procedure that you went through And then you go through the guilt offering and the sin offering and the burnt offering. And so, Jake, were those different kinds of animals, different kinds of things that happened on each one of those, or were they all the same?
I think they're different.
They are different, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Different things were spelled out for each one of these that had to be done. And
Right.
so it is kind of interesting because we look at these other skin diseases and you just like, oh, go show yourself for the priest, show him your thing. And if it does this and does that, you do this.
Right.
And this one is different because it's so much more specific. And I guess because it's a known thing, and with the other skin diseases, it's an unknown problem that you have that. And if the hair turns white, it's this. And if the skin is red and raised up, it's this. And
right.
It goes into all this other things.
It's a very, very picturesque kind of portion here.
Yeah, very nice. And then at the end, you pour oil over them. And, anytime you see that, I think, that's talking about, oil often represents his essence, his glory, his fame, his renown.
Right.
And so we also have done this before. We did a teaching about leprosy on June 6th of 2020.
Yep.
And you can find this in YouTube. And we, if you want to see more about connecting leprosy to sin and how it makes us unclean, and there's just a lot of comparisons between these two things, we encourage you to check that out.
Yep. And that's specifically a connection of leprosy and sin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it goes on in this, Jake, what does it talk about as we continue to finish up in the rest of this Torah portion?
So then it goes into bodily discharges for men and women that can make you unclean.
And you have to read to find out what those are.
Right.
So
we might get kicked off of YouTube if we
We're not going to go into details on that, but if you've never checked it out, go check it out. He thought of everything, all the things that can happen and the places that things can come from. He thought of them.
Exactly.
No stone was unturned.
Right.
So he made us.
He turned over all the stones.
Knew how this would work.
He knew how dirty we were.
Yes. And so that concludes week 28 about the leper. Do you have anything else that we left out or didn't say?
I'm sure we did leave things out, but they're in there. You know where to find them. They're in the text.
That's right. Read the text. If you haven't, do it, please. But that concludes our edition of this week's Torah Portion, week 28. We appreciate you stopping by, and stay tuned for more.
All right.
This is Matt
and Jake
signing off.